A lot of people never experience an accident in all their years of flying, and I've experienced more than one. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've learned during those experiences. Me and my uncle had decided to scout for elk, and we wanted to get an early start. We wanted to get over to the Ochiko National Forest before it was really getting light out, so that we had a chance to see the elk when they're moving about early in the morning. Approximately 8:30 in the morning, I realized I was too low and couldn't outclimb the rising terrain. At that point, I had a decision to make. There was a little bit of an opening to the left where the trees were a little bit lower, and I thought I could make it through that opening. As I was in my turn, and I would guess that I was probably less than 30 or 40 feet off the ground, I looked down at my airspeed indicator and I thought, that's not good. And about that time, the left wing stalled. I don't remember hitting the ground. When I awoke, the smell of juniper was wafting through the airplane. And I looked over at my uncle and I asked him how he was. And he said he was okay. And then I asked him, how was I? He said, you're fine. You just got a small gash over your forehead. And that's probably why you're not seeing out of that eye right now. We got out of the airplane as quickly as possible, and then we decided that we needed to somehow get help. I made a mistake of going back into the airplane to do a mayday, which would have done no good at that point. When I turned the master on to send my mayday, my uncle said, hold on, it's sparking. And we had gas all around us because of all the gas that ran out of both fuel tanks. So it was not a good idea. When I turned the master off, my uncle took his Leatherman tool and cut the wires that were sparking at the alternator. And then I turned the master back on again and resumed my maydays. Looking back at that time, I was definitely in shock. We had gotten the first aid kit out, and instead of using the gauze in the first aid kit, I told my uncle that I'd save it for a time when I might really need it. So instead of using the gauze, I took the t-shirt off my body and tied it around my bloody head. My uncle decided that he knew where the ranger station was and he was going to hike to that ranger station. He left me laying alongside a road, a gravel road, and he had brought his fishing gear in 5-gallon buckets and he laid those buckets across the road just in case someone decided to come up that road and perhaps they would see me, whether I would be passed out or conscious. He wasn't sure, but he figured if they saw the buckets, they'd at least stop. Well, as luck would have it, someone did come up that road. This particular person was driving a Subaru and he had a mountain bike on top. And when he got to the buckets, he stopped. And I said, hey, can you help me? And he said, I'm going mountain biking. And I said, yeah, I just wrecked my airplane. It's over there. And I pointed to where my airplane was. And he said, oh yeah, I passed your uncle not too far back. He was almost to the ranger station. He said, but I'm going mountain biking. And that was it. He moved the buckets out of the way, left me under the tree, and went mountain biking. The rescue party showed up about an hour later, and the ambulance that they showed up with wouldn't run. So they had to get another ambulance. That took another hour. By the time the second ambulance got there, it was about 1 o'clock. So if I had had internal injuries, I'd probably be dead. But by 2 o'clock, or maybe 2:30, I was finally to the Prineville Hospital. At the hospital, they determined that I had a broken nose, pretty big gash over my forehead where it did sever a nerve and I'll probably never have feeling there again. But for the most part, I healed up. I spent most of the next year and $60,000 rebuilding the airplane. I felt like it was penance for the damage I had done, both to my airplane and to my family, because it took a while for my wife to feel comfortable with me getting in an airplane again. As you do this kind of flying, you learn what you can do and what you can't do, and hopefully you survive along the way. This other accident isn't my own story other than I happened to be there when it happened. I'm only going to share what the NTSB report said about the accident as far as the details. And I do believe that he was probably caught in my wake turbulence. When I took off, I had climbed to look at a higher spot to land. When I turned back in the direction that I had departed from, I saw this airplane smashed into the hillside. And it really didn't compute at that point that it was the person that I was flying with. It just didn't seem right. It seemed out of place. But as quickly as I had that thought, I realized it was. And I knew that he was going to be in serious condition if he was alive. So I flew back, which was only a few minutes away, to pick up the other person that was with us that day. And we returned to the accident site. It wasn't long before we determined that he was alive and that we were going to need life flight. We worked to get him out of the airplane. We got life flight on the phone and headed our way. And a few hours later, life flight was hauling him back to a hospital. I think it's actually almost worse to be on the accident scene of someone else rather than yourself. So my takeaway from this is choose who you fly with carefully. Don't put people in situations where they're over their head because the consequences are life and death. This particular accident was the one that convinced me to start wearing a helmet. Every bit of space that was left in that airplane, his body was taking up. His head was all the way up in the wing root, and he was so pinned in there that we had to bend metal to get him out. I've thought about this accident many times, and I've thought that he got really lucky, that you could probably do this accident 100 times and only survive 1 or 2 of them. It makes me take very seriously wake turbulence when I'm departing behind or flying with another airplane. And so my takeaway from this one is pay attention. This last accident was the last accident I've had. It was in 2014. It was in my airplane Bushwhacker, and I had just finished a moose hunting trip and was heading out to Iliamna to spend some time fishing and recreating. The day it happened, it was blowing pretty good. It was blowing 40 to 50 miles an hour at 1,000 feet. The terrain was rolling hills, and I thought that because it was so wide open that I could probably land anyway and not have an issue. Here's my own narrative of what happened. As I was making my way in on my approach to this Cub type 185 type strip that was in wide open area, I was basically milking my way down out of this turbulent air. And as I got closer to the ground, my touchdown point kept getting revised. I kept leaving part of the strip behind me, but I was only progressing at about probably 10 or 15 miles an hour over the ground. So I had plenty of time to look at where I was landing. As I was about 15 feet above the ground, all of a sudden, I had a gust of wind get underneath my wing and completely upset me. It basically put me in a knife edge type situation. And at that point, I went to full power and tried to fly out of it. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my right wing had made contact with the ground, and at full power, I was just flying on the edge of that wing, but the wind was underneath me, and it was pushing me in a turn to the right. As I was going to the right in this turn on a 90-degree knife edge, I realized that I was getting pulled further and further nose down because of the resistance on that right wing. And I decided that there was no point in hitting the ground hard at full power. I might as well just chop the power and accept the results. And at that point, that's what I did, is I chopped the power. Immediately, I came down off that right wing, and I came down on the left gear leg and broke that axle off. And at the time, it broke the axle, and I pretty much came to a stop almost instantly. The wheel was less than 15 feet away from the airplane, and I went kind of up on my nose and got the prop, and then that was pretty much it. I got out of the airplane, and the wind was just awful. It would be gusting 1 minute, 35, 40 miles an hour, and almost completely calm the next. And at that point, I had to decide what I was going to do with the airplane. I had a friend not far behind who was coming to land at the same spot. As he got closer, I kind of gave him a play-by-play view of what was happening on the ground with the wind so that he could kind of time his landing. He got landed, and then we decided what we were going to do with the airplane. Unfortunately, we both had pulled all of our tie-down gear out of our airplane in order to haul gear out to this particular spot. So now I had an airplane on the ground in very, very windy conditions with no real tie-down stuff. He happened to have bags that you could stick rocks in. And so we thought that with 500 to 1,000 pounds of rocks tied in a wing bag that it would hold the airplane down. We also found a piece of rebar that we drove into the ground, and I had about 100 feet of rope. So we tied down the wing that was in the wind mostly and thought that it would be secure until morning. I went back to his lodge and started making phone calls for the pieces I was going to need to put my airplane back together. At that point, the airplane was in pretty good shape. One broken gear leg, one bent oleo, one bent aileron, but other than that, the airplane was flyable with another prop. I had the parts come in FedEx. It was going to have to sit there for a couple days, but we were going to go out the next morning, make sure that it was secure, and then wait for the parts, and then put the parts on and fly it back out, and everything would be good. Well, best laid plans don't always go as planned. During the night, the wind came up much stronger. According to his guide who was guiding a bear hunter out there, the wind was blowing somewhere between 70 and 90 during the night, and it picked up my airplane and took it about 100 yards and slammed it down upside down. And at that point, it wasn't going to fly out again, not without a lot of work. So I made a decision to part it out in the field, and I spent the next 2 days out there by myself taking the airplane apart, and then we spent a day hauling all the parts back in. It took me several years to get that airplane back together, but I do have it back together now. It's the black airplane in some of my other videos that you're going to see over the next years. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I always try to learn something from my mistakes, and so I've thought about this accident probably more than I've thought about any of the other accidents or incidents I've had, mainly because I'm not sure I would have done anything much differently. And I guess with that, you're going to have to accept the consequences. The only thing that I will say is you won't catch me without duckbill anchors in my airplane as a means of tie down. So having duckbill anchors and a bunch of rope would have saved me a bunch of heartache. I didn't have any insurance on this airplane, and so it was all out of pocket. If you had asked me if I would wreck my airplane at this particular spot, I would have told you never. But after having wrecked my airplane at this particular spot, I can tell you that things happen that you would never expect flying an airplane. So expect the unexpected. When I got the parts home, I took a good look at the axle that broke, and that particular axle was cracked more than halfway through. You could see in the crack where it had rusted, and where it broke, it was fresh metal. I'm not convinced that that axle would have broken had I not come down on it so hard, but it is a good reminder that if you're landing on big rocks and using your airplane off airport, to pay extra special attention on those parts that take the abuse the most often. And when you get all done bringing your parts back in a bucket, then you get to talk to the state trooper about what happened.